5 markers in competency 5. The first appearance of the structural pattern that returns in C7 and C8, the wahoo and the what, and a deep stop on 5.5, the marker most ACC trained coaches skim. By the end of this video, you can identify each C5 marker, hold the who versus what pair as you listen, and call 5.5 cleanly without confusing it with empathic pacing. Competency 5 is maintains presence. At PCC, presence is structural, not atmospheric. It is the coach acting in response to two things at once: the whole person of the client and what the client wants to accomplish. The disposition behind it is curiosity. The behavior that holds the container is silence the client uses. 5 markers: 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5 and 4, 5.5. 4 of the 5, 501, 502, 5.3, 5 and 4 are C2 proxy markers. When you tag a C5 proxy, you are evidencing presence in C5 and coaching mindset in C2 simultaneously. The structural shift from ACC. ACC asks the coach to be present, attentive, calm, available. PCC asks the coach to act on presence, to do something with what they noticed about the client. Presence is no longer a state. It is a sequence of moves the coach makes in response to what the client puts in the room. 5.1 and 5.2 appear as a pair. Hold them together. 5.1 is the coach acting in response to the whole person of the client, the woi chu, who the client is, their values, their patterns, what makes them them. 5.2 is the coach acting in response to what the client wants to accomplish in this session, the what, the outcome, the work. A coach who only tracks the who is having a meaningful conversation that does not move toward outcome. A coach who only tracks the what is mechanically running an action plan. PCC presence holds both at once. The coach notices that the client values careful preparation and uses that to shape the next move toward the session outcome. The W who informs how the coach pursues the what. This pattern returns. 7.2 and 7.3 in evoking awareness. 8.2 and 8.3 in growth. Each pair is the same logic. Track both halves at once. 5.1. Coach acts in response to the whole person of the client, the wahoo. 5.1 fires when the coach uses something they have learned about who the client is and lets that shape what they do next. The values, the patterns, the way the client thinks, what this sounds like. You said earlier that you make decisions slowly when the stakes are real. We are at a point in this session where the choice is real. How do you want to take time with this? That is 5.1. The coach noticed something about who the client is, and the next move was responsive to it. The marker is action, not observation. A coach who notices but does not act has not demonstrated 5.1. They have demonstrated 5.4, curiosity. The cut between those two is in the next slides. 5.1 is a C2 proxy, listening test. Did the coach do something next that responded to who the client is, not just to what the client said? If yes, 5.1. 5.2, coach acts in response to what the client wants to accomplish throughout this session, the what. 5.2 fires when the coach holds the session outcome and lets that shape what they do next, the work the client said they want to leave with, what this sounds like. You said you want to leave today with a decision. We are 40 minutes in and I am hearing exploration. Want to take stock of what you have and decide what you still need before we move toward the call. That is 5.2. The coach is acting in response to the what, the desired outcome, and partnering on whether the session is on its trajectory. Throughout this session matters. 5.2 is not a one-time check. It is the coach carrying the agreement across the arc, returning to it when the work needs orientation. 5.2 is a C2 proxy. Listening test. Did the coach bring the session back to what the client said they wanted, not by repeating it, but by acting on it? If yes, 5.2. 5.3. Coach partners with the client by supporting the client to choose what happens in this session. 5.3 is the choice marker. The coach offers options or invites the client to direct the work. The client chooses. The coach follows. What this sounds like. There are two threads I'm noticing. You could pull on what is happening with your team or on what you want to be true for yourself going into this. Which one is more alive for you right now? That is 5.3. The coach made the threads visible and gave the client the choice. The marker is in the partnership. A coach who chooses the thread for the client, even with great instinct, has not demonstrated 5.3. The choice belongs to the client. 5.3 is a C2 proxy. Listening test. Did the client direct what happened next, with the coach actively supporting that direction? If the coach proposed and the client agreed by default, 5.3 is thin. 5.4, coach demonstrates curiosity to learn more about the client. 5.4 is the disposition marker. The coach is interested in who the client is, what makes them them, what is alive in this conversation that the coach has not yet seen, what this sounds like. I don't fully understand what makes this particular project the one that matters most. Can you tell me more about that? Or, there is something I am hearing in how you describe your team. I want to learn more about it. Both are 5.4. 5.4 is curiosity that the coach makes audible. Internal curiosity that the client never sees does not demonstrate the marker. The client has to know the coach is interested. 5.4 is a C2 proxy. Listening test. Did the coach ask a question or make a comment whose primary purpose was to learn more about the client, not to advance the agenda, not to coach the issue, just to understand the person better? If yes, 5.4. 5.5. Coach allows for silence, pause, or reflection. Plain text, 3 short words. Easy marker to read, hardest marker for ACC trained coaches to actually demonstrate at PCC. What this sounds like, which is to say, what this does not sound like. The coach asks a question, the client takes a breath, the coach jumps in to clarify, soften, rephrase. That is not 5.5, that is filling space. 5.5 sounds like silence. 2 seconds, 5 seconds, sometimes longer. Silence the client uses to think, to feel, to find the next thing they want to say. The coach holds it. The coach does not narrate the silence. The coach does not ask if the client needs more time. The coach is simply there, and the silence is part of the work. 5.5 is not a C2 proxy. It is its own marker, and it does almost as much work as the other 4 C5 markers combined. The skim. Most ACC trained coaches think they have 5.5 because they are warm and they wait. They do not. 3 concrete patterns that are not 5.5. 1. Filling space with affirmation. The client pauses, the coach says, take your time. That is filling. The silence is gone. 2. Filling space with summary. The client pauses. The coach reflects what was just said before the client has finished thinking. The reflection arrives before the silence has done its work. That is paraphrase running over reflection time. 3. Filling space with the next question. The client pauses. The coach asks the follow-up because they are afraid the silence is awkward. That is the most common pattern at the ACC to PCC transition. What 5.5 actually is. Silence the client uses. Watch for what the client did with the space. Did they go deeper? Did they correct something? Did they arrive at language that was not there before? If the silence had work to do and the client did the work, the marker fired. 5.4 and 5.1 sound related. Both involve the whole person of the client. The cut is in what the coach does. 5.4 is curiosity as disposition. The coach is interested. The coach is paying attention to who the client is. The coach asks to learn. 5.1 is acting on what curiosity revealed. The coach learned something about who the client is, and now the next move responds to it. Disposition, action, concrete. Tell me more about how you make decisions. That is 5.4. The coach is curious. Then the client answers. They make decisions slowly when stakes are real, fast when stakes are low. Mid-session, the coach says, "We are at a point where the stakes are real. What is the slow version of you doing right now?" That is 5.1. The coach acted on what they learned. Both can fire in the same arc. They are not exclusive. But the cut for tagging matters. Curiosity without action does not pass. 5.1. C5 done. 5 markers, the first who versus what pair, and 5.5 unpacked carefully because it is the marker most ACC trained coaches think they have when they do not. Next video. C6, listens actively, 7 markers, the multi-channel listening pattern. C7, evokes awareness, 8 markers, the second who versus what pair, and the deep work on quality and economy of questioning. 15 markers in one video, the heaviest listening and evoking work in the framework.